You might be wondering why the preview is a Guildhest. Well, give it a few seconds. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time we're playing Astrologian, and I will admit right now that it took me several duties to shake the rust off and start to actually play Astrologian right by my own teachings. Or at least it felt that way. This time around, I would have said we had a lot of variety, but this takes a strange turn in the second half. With that said, for our first duty, we start with Lost City of Amdapor, which is an incredibly weird dungeon. We have the gremlins with the debuff that is removed by someone else using /comfort on you. We have chests that are sometimes mimics, so just don't touch the chests. The second boss teaches a valuable lesson: don't touch the first mob if you're not the tank. If it puts the debuff on you too, then congratulations! You might just be the boss's favorite squeaky toy for the next 40 seconds. The final boss has this mechanic where when he starts casting Ruinous Omen, you need to open 2 doors such that you aren't presently on the field when the attack resolves. The doors are revealed right at the start of the fight, and you need to open 2 doors with the same sign on them, so simply mark 2 of them before they go dark. While the doors are open, you get a second look so you can mark new doors at that time. But usually the boss should be dead before that happens. In fact, most groups can survive just tanking the Ruinous Omen right in the face, although I don't recommend it. For Duty 2, we're going to one of the Dawntrail MSQ relevant dungeons, the level 97 one, so if you don't want to see that, jump to this timestamp here. With that, we're of course going to Vanguard. It was already clear to me from the very start that the tank had a lot to learn. This can happen at any level obviously, even if it is surprising at level 97. And it didn't help that I was rather shaky in my Astrologian performance today. Right at the start, we have a big AoE pull that almost goes sideways, causing the tank to choose to pull 1 pack at a time for a while. The problem here is that at this point in the game, even a single pack kind of requires a bit more effort from the tank for it to go breezy. However, Super Bolide from full HP is probably not it. As we progressed through the duty, I was both trying to pay attention to what I could say to teach them, but also trying to figure out what on earth I need to do as an Astrologian, because it had been a hot minute since I had been put on such a tough trial on my knowledge of the job. When we almost wiped to a big pull, I offered to give the tank a few tips. Now, first off, what went wrong in that pull is that the tank had a tendency to go for like 10 seconds or more at the start of each pull with no defensive up, and when they finally used one, it was almost always just camouflage. That's not bad, but it's not even close to the best. So the damage overwhelmed me. So first, I asked if I could give them a tip, and they said yes, so I told them, short and specific, use Heart of Corundum way more. On cooldown even. Yes, that's not perfect, that's not necessarily optimal, but if they start with that, they will already be way better than before. I also mentioned they should try to have a defensive running at all times in big AoE pulls like this, and also that camouflage isn't the best option in the arsenal either. The Heart of Corundum tip seemed to land just fine, but the cooldowns all the time bit was less quickly picked up. That's fine, now they have something to work with. There were much less issues during boss fights, as notably, it was mainly me who was having trouble finding efficient ways to heal people up when they got vuln stacks, which also led to a death at least once. For Duty 3, we went to Grand Cosmos, and here, things seemed to go pretty well overall. The only boss mistake I noticed was the tank leading the final boss to cleave some furniture, but we had enough to still make it through with no deaths. For me personally, I could have been a lot better about using Celestial Intersection on cooldown. I think due to the sheer amount of things needed to be weaved, it often gets sidelined, and when I finally finish all the other stuff, I forget it's even there. Another thing is you may also notice that not once in this entire video will you see Neutral Sect on cooldown. That's another thing I could have done better. For Duty 4, we went to Castrum Abania, and this group was solid. The one standout thing was that the warriors seemed to be very strange about their cooldown usage at times. I saw them use Rampart, then Raw Intuition at some points, and sometimes waited so long with Raw Intuition that I had to intervene. However, and this is the more important part, over the course of the duty, it felt like they got more reliable, so maybe they were just shaking off some rust. Additionally, they used a level 70 weapon, so who knows, might not be well acquainted with the duty either. On a more important note, I know this was reasonably doable in late Endwalker, but how often do you see a group do this twice. Both of the DPS were surprised. I was mildly surprised too. It is funny to meet such a random, yet at the end of the day, really pointless DPS check. For duty 5, we went to Urth's Fount with what appears to be me, one other mentor, and 6 sprouts. I saw my co-healer said they were new, but I did not feel like healing was lacking, and they were using attacks too. Overall, the fight is quite chaotic, and has a lot of painful attacks. Notably, the tank buster hits like a train if the tank isn't using a defensive cooldown, but it is still survivable. Many mechanics also just punish hard if you don't dodge. The bleeds that are applied to everyone also can really work the healers. And then there's the slows. Personally, I chose to Ishuna myself and whoever was perceived strongest DPS, namely being the Pictomancer looking at the enmity. By the time I had done that much, there was little value in using Ishuna on anyone else. Why didn't you Ishuna your co-healer? They can Ishuna themselves. They elected not to. We also had an unfortunate death moments before the DPS check, and it was the Pictomancer too. Speaking of the DPS check, notice that Sprout healer who said they were new? Look at that performance! What a hero Sprout! Presence of mind and stone spam for the DPS check. For duty 6, we have the level 93 dungeon for Dawntrail. So, if you don't want to see that, jump to this timestamp here. With that said, we went to Worqor Zormor as a 3-minute replacement, and all I can say is, whatever reason the previous healer left for, probably not due to a weak tank. This was a solid group. It was quite funny, because now with a predictable solid tank, I felt more safe in testing out what works and doesn't work some more. In particular, I often had a pull where it felt like everything went as planned, then the next pull, divination was available, and suddenly chaos. It is not surprising how much distraction having the whole card playing piece can be. In regards to boss advice on this one, the first boss can feel a bit overwhelming with all the things to see. Remember, whoever it freezes will resolve second, so when all of the boys come out at once, look for the quadrant where the small guy pointing at it is frozen and the big guy in it is also frozen. That's the safe spot for the first part. For the second boss, my biggest tip here is when this triangle shape happens, remember that there are also safe spots out in Narnia. I know that sounds like an absurd tip, but I didn't even realize that was an option until like my 4th go at this boss myself. For the final boss, the difficult part I would say are the books. The fire one does this gradually expanding AoE, the water one is a sideways push, and the wind one is a circular push out that hits twice, summoning tornadoes. I recommend saving knockback immunity for the follow-up wind push so you don't have to worry about positioning yourself so you don't get shoved into a tornado. For the water in the fire Y combo, placing yourself around here will ensure that you get shoved past the fire waves, so you don't need the knockback immunity anyway. Anyway, and much more importantly, did you know that Warrior can solo Worqor Zormor synced? Hilariously, the Bloodsucker ads after the first boss are probably the hardest part of the dungeon in that aspect. If you're curious, I put a link to the stream VOD in the description. For duty 7, this is where things get a little strange. We start with a Guildhest more than a feeler with a Reaper that knew me. Hello! With that said, I have a question for all of you. What happens when the stale bubbles are ignored? Like, is something supposed to happen? Are they the source of the rotten jam that didn't do anything really? What is the deal here? Like, what are we supposed to be doing? I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that we can beat the boss so fast, it didn't matter, of course. For duty 8, we went to the Guildhest Long Live the Queen, which is an absolutely insane duty. Hilarious and mildly challenging, I guess. This is actually the first time I ever died in a Guildhest, and you can see this tutorial pop up as proof. Not much I could do when I got sleeped between 2 bombs. Oh well, the rest of the duty went just fine, but wow, that's a lot of explosions. So many explosions! I actually wish they'd use things like mobs crowd controlling the players in duties more, because that tends to be a lot more effective at causing danger to happen than simply tons of damage. For duty 9 then, we have the Guildhest enemy parties with... normally we just go. Is the Marauder okay? We eventually went on to do it, and the Marauder seemed to be trying. I wonder... Not trying to be mean, in fact, the opposite, but have we found the target demographic for this difficulty of content? Remember, we all start at different skill levels, and sometimes some have a much steeper hill to climb to meet a point others would consider a normal starting point. I don't know, maybe it was something else, but it got me thinking. For Duty 10, we finish off with the Guildhest Annoy the Void, which I have to say might actually be the dumbest Guildhest of them all, aside from Under the Armor. We're told to snuff out the flames, but as far as I can see, the boss only gains a singular damage buff from the flames, as long as there is one, and killing any of the ads spawns another one. So it feels like there are so many flames that you can't snuff them all out. And if he just needs one to get full power, what is even the point? Not to mention how you can just ignore everything and kill him. Maybe have the tank AoE to get the dorks down at the same time? It's just really silly. This set was very strange, how for the last almost half, we just got Guildhest, 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 Guildhest. I would have guessed there was something to it. Is there a common trend with spamming Guildhests on a Friday afternoon or something? Weird. Anyway, I really got tested on my knowledge of Astrologian on this set, and I can certainly admit that while I know well how Astrologian is meant to be played in a dungeon and how to teach it, doing it is often a different story. Unfortunately, all these Guildhests really ruined the duty spread on our overall tally. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, before Dawntrail, Astrologian's card system worked very differently. Notably, you only drew one card at a time. Weirdly, this also meant you were given an undraw action, meant to throw the card away. You had no reason to ever do this. None. Hilariously though, the card being held was a buff, which meant you could also just right-click the buff off. And the difference here is that the undraw action took a weave, whereas just right-clicking the buff didn't. And you could just make a macro, meaning that undraw was hands down the most useless action in the game.